Welcome to the Crack House Chronicles, your favorite true crime podcast. I am Donnie, and with me is a man who recently added squats to his workouts by moving the beer to the bottom shelf of the fridge. It's Dale.
Damn genius move, ain't it?
It is, man.
You got to get in a couple squats.
Yeah. That way you can grab you 2 beers while you're down there.
Yeah, that's right. Then you cut down on your squats. So you just have to grab one at a time and we double up on reps.
Well, like you said, you got your cup that holds 2 beers, so.
That's right. So you just do it twice. And that way you feel like you ain't cheating yourself. Plus you get a reward.
Yeah.
Double fister.
You do have to reward yourself when you work out, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's the whole point of it, right?
That's right.
Got to feel good and make you feel good.
Yeah.
That's right.
Doggone right. What's going on, bud?
Oh, same old, same old. You
Same old.
You know me.
I know
Man
you.
of many words.
Same old, same old.
It's a good day, though.
It is a very good day.
Yeah, it's kind of rainy and all crappy, but
Well,
other than
it's
that,
hot.
it's a good day because
Yeah.
it's record day.
Yeah, it is our record day, and we're
Happy.
doing it for you guys because we love our listeners.
Yeah, we do.
Yep. You got anything to mention? You got anybody you want to shout out to, bud?
Yeah, speaking of loving listeners, man, we got to give the MVP award to our buddy Jennifer Orcutt.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah, for a really kindly donation. That was really heartfelt.
Yeah.
It's kind of humbling. I appreciate that. Thanks so much.
Above and beyond.
Yeah, you're the man.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Yeah. Person of the year.
Yeah, MVP.
Jennifer went to our website and clicked on the donate button, and she contributed to our gas fund.
We appreciate it.
Yep, put some gas in the tank, and it was very generous, and we do thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
From the bottom of our heart.
MVP.
Hey!
Yay. It deserves that for sure.
And if anybody
At
else
least.
else wants to be like Jennifer and go to the website and click on the donate button, they sure can.
We appreciate it.
And if you just want to buy something from the store page, you can do that too.
That's right. Summer.
And-
Can you get some new shirts for summer?
Yeah, and just tell a friend about us. That will help too.
Tell a friend. Tell them all.
Yep.
Scream from the rooftops.
Yeah. Holler it out.
That's right. Or you could just roll over to Spotify. You know, they got a new little feature there.
Tell us about that feature.
You know, you just go in there and click on the episode, and when you do it, down at the bottom, it pops up and says, "How did you enjoy this episode?"
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Yeah.
What is it?
What'd you think about this episode?
Yeah, what'd you think about this episode? And then you can leave a message. Or
Yeah.
leave something.
I did find out that you can change that question or whatever. You can add whatever you want to.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah. But
Okay, well, maybe it'll say something else time you look.
I do like that. You know, what'd you think about this episode?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
And give us your input on Spotify.
Yeah, that'd be
And
cool.
click that 5-star.
And there's a little 5-star gimmick there, too. Just
Yeah.
like on Apple and whatever else you can use.
If your podcast platform allows it, click it. Click that 5-star and write something in the box.
That's right.
All right.
Or you can jump over and throw some money in the Patreon if you want.
Yep. Whatever you want to do.
Whatever you want to do. Or nothing. Just be happy and just listen.
Yeah. We
It's all good.
love all of our listeners.
It's all good.
Yep.
Chris Waynick, check your mailbox.
Yeah.
Time this comes out, you should be ecstatic.
Yeah.
All right, man.
All right. We're going to get into this episode, Dale.
Well, let's roll. I was going to say something. The other day, I was listening to a podcast, and I'm going to tell you what. It was 19 minutes before they ever started.
Really?
And then I listened to another one that was 9 minutes and 20-something seconds before they ever started. So I tell you what, our little 2-minute rant, it's good to go.
Well, we're about 3 minutes and 30 seconds in.
Well, we wouldn't have been if I wouldn't have been ranting about that.
Okay. Well, we try to make it short and sweet at the beginning.
That's right. We do it like we like it.
But, you know, last week we talked about Carina Saunders that was murdered there in Oklahoma City,
That's right.
Bethany, Oklahoma area. Yeah. And this week we are back in Oklahoma City.
Mm-hmm. We didn't go far.
No, we were staying in that same area. And at the end of this episode, we're going to be talking a little bit more about Carina.
Yeah.
But the episode we're talking about today is the Oklahoma City Butcher.
Right.
Yeah.
So we go back to 76 this week.
1976. And this is an unsolved case
Yes.
that we're doing and sort of trying to tie some things together and try to.
Alrighty.
So our story starts on Thursday, April the 1st, 1976.
April Fool's Day.
It is April Fool's Day. And this
So is
is.
this a real show or is this going to be a joke?
No, this is the real deal, dude.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, just speak.
But they were 3 workers. They were at a job site in Oklahoma City.
Yeah, he worked for an oil company or something.
Yeah, but they were doing some kind of construction work or something there.
Some on the job site.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But these workers' names were Gene Shores, Jimmy Bishop, and Deco Duke.
That's a name.
Yeah. And they were.
D-E-C-H-O. Duke.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
And they were employed by the Standard Drilling Company.
Correct.
And they were at this job site and they were waiting for a colleague or some kind of supervisor of theirs to show up on the job site to sort of direct them to what they were supposed to be doing.
Yeah, a fourth man, if you will.
Yeah. But they sort of grew impatient, trying to wait on this person to show up, and it got a little boring for them. So they began looking around for something to do.
Right.
Occupy their time.
I guess.
And this was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 3 p.m. And this is when the three guys, they decided to walk towards an abandoned house. This was in the neighborhood of Research Park. It was right in the middle of Oklahoma City, Dale.
Right.
And this house...
It's abandoned, right?
Yeah, it had been abandoned for a while. And it was located at 325 Northeast 6th Street.
Correct.
But since then, it had been replaced by a modern apartment building.
Yeah.
So,
now some place says is that this was right across the street, and then some place right in the area. So it was somewhere close to where they were. Not sure exactly.
So if you want to Google map it, you can see what's there today. But it's 325 Northeast 6th Street.
Right.
There in Oklahoma City. And the three men, they approached the front door of this abandoned house, and they found it to be boarded shut.
Yep. No luck.
Yeah, and two of the men, they would head to the back door, which they found unlocked. While the other guy, he slipped around the side and went through a external hole in the side of the house.
Right. That kind of got me there. The guys walk around to go in the back door, and he just walks through the wall.
Yeah.
Meet you inside.
Yeah, see you on the inside, guys. But these guys, they entered the home at all about the same time as what had been reported.
Yeah.
But when they got inside the house, they were immediately hit with a smell.
Yeah, not a good one.
And it would be later described as
the sin of death.
Yeah, decomp.
Yeah.
And the house was just full of junk and clutter and just trash.
Right.
And the two men that entered through the unlocked back door, they would trip on a nearby item, which they kicked off to the side, which was, they weren't aware of it at the time. And as they sort of wandered through the house a little bit more, they would make a discovery that would shock them pretty hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the guys had been carrying a hoe.
Yeah, a garden variety hoe.
Yeah. Something you work in a garden with.
Right.
Just to clear that up.
Yeah.
And he was using this hoe to sort of poke and prod around the house, moving clutter.
Trash and junk,
yeah, so I guess he wouldn't step on anything, which, I get that. And one of the items he moved around was a popcorn bucket from a movie theater.
Yeah, just down the road.
Yeah. And it had been left near the back door.
Okay.
And this man, he used the hoe to knock it over.
Yeah, just knocked the bucket over.
And it was at that moment when there was something rolled out of the bucket.
Yeah.
And it caused them to stir quite a bit.
Yeah, and one of them kind of looked at it and said, that's the head of a dog.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think so.
But the other guy, they sort of corrected him, but it was a human head.
So I got to ask you, how bad has it got to be for you to think someone's head is a dog's head?
Well, I've thought about that, and if the head was beaten pretty bad, I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know how close the guy was looking at it anyway. So, or how, far away.
And I don't know
whichever one made the comment.
Yeah, I don't know how much light they had in there to go on.
Yeah, that's true.
So, but I will give him the benefit of the doubt.
Anyway, he thought it was a dog's head, but it was not.
It turned out to be a human head.
Yeah.
And later, when they were speaking to the police, all three of the men would claim that they had a hard time recognizing the object as a human head because of how abused it looked, Dale.
Right.
And the three men, they immediately fled the house to get help and called the authorities.
Yeah, but it was April Fool's Day, right?
Yes.
So nobody's going to believe this story.
No, but you'd think if you're calling the cops or somebody, you'd think they'd take your word for it, but...
Well, this is 1976.
True.
So back then, everything was a little more laid back, I would say. But
when the first officers arrived at the scene, they quickly discovered that...
It's no joke.
No joke, man. Now, while the three guys had stumbled up on a severed human head inside the house, they had no idea that the rest of the victim's body, which turned out to be female, had been severed and spread around the house in this abandoned property.
So it's all dismembered, cut up, and spread through the house.
Yes. And police, they would find the woman's arms, legs, and torso distributed through the house, man. Right. It would come out, Dale, that the object the two men had tripped over at the back door, which one of the men had instinctively kicked away, was the woman's thigh.
Yeah. They said it was kind of solid but squishy when he kicked it.
Yeah. So it makes me wonder how much light they had in this house.
No, I would say not a lot.
Probably not.
Well, it's 1976 and there's no power.
Yeah.
I don't know what 1976 has got to do with it. It's still no power.
But now get this, Dale. The victim's sexual organs had been removed from her pelvic region and were missing from the crime scene. And police would never recover this, believing that the killer might have kept this as some kind of trophy, as he had done with one of her hands, and which was also missing. Yeah. And police were only able to recover one of the victim's hands. That meant that the potential for matching fingerprints was,
It was cut in half.
Yeah.
50%.
Kind of limited, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, investigators would originally speculate that the woman's body had been torn up or dismembered by dogs or some kind of animal getting in the house.
Yeah, but I think the autopsy revealed, not long after that, it was definitely cut up by a killer.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, not ripped.
Yeah. According to the Oklahoma State Medical Examiner, this guy, his name was Dr. A.J. Chapman. A like the letter A, then J-A-Y, Chapman.
Right.
The victim had been likely killed before being cut apart.
Well, I guess that's good if you're going to be cut apart.
Yeah, according to him, had been dissected in an anatomically correct fashion, like cut up like a minute instead of it being a dog or some kind of animal.
Yeah,
what they're saying.
Well, and dissected kind of neatly, not just hacked up.
Yeah,
I would say something to that fashion.
But the details about the woman's death would be withheld by the investigators, and the autopsy would note that the victim had been deceased for approximately 4 weeks, and that her face had been pretty mutilated.
Right, okay.
So whoever committed this act had cut her face to increase the size of her smile, Dale.
Kind of like the Joker thing, right?
Yeah, extending her smile from ear to ear.
Okay, that makes a little more sense as why you might think of something else. If it's been in that bucket for a month and been beat up and hacked up,
That does make sense.
So it's, it'd be hard to tell at first.
Yeah.
Because it'd probably be bruised up and blackened and then hair and, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Now, they had a forensic sculptor come in from Norman, Oklahoma, and her name was Betty Pat Gatliff. And she would be called in to make a facial recognition of this victim, and it was floated around law enforcement agencies all over the region for the next several months.
Wow.
But ultimately failed to find a match. And the woman's name would be unknown for a long time, for almost 2 decades, which is crazy.
Yeah.
Which we're going to get into just a little bit later on her.
Right.
But the police, they speculated this victim had been a white woman between the ages of 25 and 35 years old, and stood between 5 foot and 5'4" with brown hair.
Right.
But they did some blood tests, and it later revealed that this woman was Native American, and she had some Native American ancestry and indicated a younger age than expected. It turned out she was likely 18 to 22 years old. And some dental and intestinal testing confirmed that the victim revealed that she had likely come from a lower economic background. And it led the investigators to speculate that she'd at least been homeless at the time of her death, which also indicated some kind of involvement to sex work, which was really based on the neighborhood where her body was found.
Right, yeah. Known for prostitution in that area.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not good.
Not good at all.
Now, it was about 3 years later, and this was on another Thursday in April, and there was a second discovery that was made. And this was on April the 19th of 1979. And this was when a group of kids that were playing basketball. They were in a park.
Right.
And this was along the 300 block of Northeast 10th Street.
Yeah, which is about a half a mile north from where the original victim was found back in 1976.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it was old news at this point, which, everybody had forgot about this first victim. And there had been no coverage on it or anything since that time.
Well, it's been 3 years, but, but still.
Yeah, I guess everybody just forgot about it.
Yeah.
But one of the kids had a dog with him, and who sort of disappeared for a little bit while they were playing.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just a few minutes later, the dog returned, and it had something in its mouth.
Right. It was like dragging something into the alleyway near the basketball court.
Yes. And when some of the kids ran over to see what it was, they discovered that it was a human head.
Another head.
Yes.
That's bad, man. A bunch of kids.
Yeah, I can't imagine. The police, they were called to the scene and found what was going on. In addition to the victim's head, which had been severed from her body and then mutilated, just like this first victim we talked about.
With the big smile and all, you think?
Yeah. They found some other discoveries around the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And they were body parts.
Being brown bagged.
Yes.
Wrapped in newspaper or brown bags and just chunked.
Yeah, just scattered around the neighborhood.
Crazy. Where all these kids are playing.
Yeah. And the police dogs, they were brought out to the location, and they led the police to many of these discoveries, which would be made over the next couple days.
Right.
And police would find numerous pieces of this female victim's body, which had been specifically cut into small portions of skin and tissue.
That's the weird part to me.
Yes.
I mean, it's all weird, but this part is just, it doesn't make sense.
I know. Investigators would note that each piece of the victim's body had been specifically cut, and it was just, there was no blood.
Right.
It was like each piece had been
methodically cleaned or something,
yeah,
took out and cleaned and
washed.
Yeah.
Before the killer disposed
Before he
of
put
it.
it in a bag and threw it in the yard.
Yeah. And among the body parts discovered by the police during this search were the victim's pelvis and left hand. And the latter would help police identify the victim within just a few days.
Right.
And found nearby these parts was a bloody shoe, which was believed to belong to the victim and would later be confirmed through some forensic testing. Now, because the young woman had been so viciously butchered, police had only been able to find just select body parts.
Right.
And her identity would prove to be elusive over the next few days of this investigation. At this point, the police had only recovered her left hand, part of her pelvis, and just
those pieces of flesh.
Yeah.
In her head, of course.
And an autopsy would reveal that
her head had been cut, from her body with a downward stroke, from behind, right behind her ears, toward her body.
Yeah, in the direction of her torso.
It's like a guillotine chop.
Yeah, pretty much. Now, it was about a week later, this was on April the 25th of 1979, the police in Oklahoma would announce that they had identified the victim of this crime. And the person's name was Arlie Bell Killian.
Yeah, she was only 22.
Yeah, and lived in the area. But unlike the first victim, was not believed to have been a missing person. Rather, had been seen by her family just hours before her head was found in this nearby neighborhood that the kids found by the dog.
Hang on now. If this is just hours before, how did he have time to do all this plus clean and do all that?
I don't know,
talking about?
I don't know.
That kind of, okay.
That is kind of odd, isn't it?
It's a tight timeline for sure.
Yeah, unless he was just doing it and still in the area.
Express death or something. I don't know.
Yeah. But now this Arlie Killian, it turned out, had lived a pretty rough life before her death, Dale.
Sad.
Her father, his name was Eddie Killian Jr., and he was a noted criminal who had abused Arlie and her other family members over a long period of time.
Right.
Which culminated in his brutal beating and rape of Arlie at the age of 16.
Shit.
And as a result of being sexually assaulted by her own father, Arlie would end up just getting into substance abuse, man, and just going deep into it.
Yeah.
And it was just really hitting on her existing mental health issues, too.
Well, I mean, I'm sure that created a bunch of them.
A mess, man.
Yeah.
I can't imagine.
It's sad, really.
Yeah. But this would ultimately result in Arlie becoming homeless and just, as she was just getting into adulthood.
Yeah. You can't blame her, really. She's just trying to get the hell away from that.
Yeah. Just get out of there.
Sad situation for him.
I mean, anything's got to be better than what you're living in.
Right.
But police had picked up Arlie several times as a teenager for just walking through the streets of Oklahoma City, which was she spent most of her time doing. And years later, she would fall prey to the dark world of sex trafficking, but was never arrested for any of these crimes, meaning only that her police-related run-ins were just substance abuse or
vagrancy.
Yeah, just hanging out.
Yeah.
Despite police identifying the victim approximately a week after the discovery of her head, that didn't end the torment of Arlie's loved ones. The killer continued to dispose of remains for over another week. So that's what makes me think.
Another week or more, man. It's crazy.
Yeah, he was just, this person was just.
So you think he did it at that piece and then dropped them out and then kept playing with the rest?
Probably. That's what it sounds like.
That's probably a bad choice of words, but yeah, you know what I mean.
Just hanging on to it for trophy like.
Yeah.
Yeah. And after making the original discovery of the victim's head, hand, and pelvis on April the 19th, police would be called out to the area around the crime scene several times over the next 2 weeks.
Dude, you wouldn't even let your kids go outside and play because you're afraid they're going to find another piece of his lady's body.
No, you wouldn't let your kids go out there and play.
Crazy.
Mm-mm. And each time the police would discover an additional piece of the victim's body, leading to the events of May the 1st, 1979, in which the rest of Arlie Killian's body would be found in the 200 block of Northeast 7th Street.
Yeah, and it's still just a block or two away from the one from 1976.
Yes. Well, then in that abandoned house.
Yeah. So
it leads me to think that this killer
is there close or something, or at least knows the area very well.
Very familiar. Yeah.
At least knows it good enough to when he can drop stuff off and when he can't.
Yep. And not only did the discovery of the body indicate some, like we said, familiarity with the area, but also implied that the killer was also following along with the case in the press.
Oh, I'm sure.
And the investigators even began to think that the killer was just playing some kind of sick game.
I don't doubt that either.
With the disposal of the victim's body parts. And like you said, toying with the police and attempting to make their job pretty hard.
Yeah, you just throw pieces out and wait for the newspaper to come out and see what it says.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they were investigating what it was wrapped in and
all that, yeah.
Yeah. Now, there was one investigator even floated around the idea that the killer enjoyed this part of the crime just as much, if not more, than the killing.
Oh, I'm sure he's getting off on this, dude.
Yeah. Now, in the days after the identification of Arlie Killian, police would announce that they had arrested a man named Eugene Johnson in relation to this crime. Now, Johnson, he was a man that lived along North Walnut Avenue at the time, was held briefly for some mental evaluation.
Yeah.
But the police would insist that he was only being held as a material witness in this case.
Right.
And shortly after, Johnson would be released from custody.
Cleared.
Yeah, cleared of all that stuff.
Like we said, are you ever really cleared?
No, you're not really cleared. Nobody's ever cleared.
You just get to go home for a while.
Now, while the first victim that was found in that abandoned house in 1976 had attracted a lot of media attention early on, it quickly faded.
Yeah.
Not only was the victim's identity still a mystery.
Right. They still hadn't ID'd her.
The case of Arlie Killian was in the press right now in 1979.
Yeah.
Now, unlike the first case, police would identify a couple of suspects early on. One was that Eugene Johnson.
Correct.
And it would be floated as a possible suspect in the days after the identification of Arlie Killian. But, like we said, he was soon cleared. But there was another name that was mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This guy's name was Perry Lee Killian.
Which is her brother.
Yes.
Yeah.
Who had conveniently escaped from a mental hospital just the same day that his sister was killed.
Some Michael Myers stuff, man.
It is, man. And this was on April the 19th of 1979. And before being confined to a mental institute, Perry Killian had expressed a history of violent and bizarre behavior, which made him a prime suspect in his sister's death.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, back in 1976, the same year that the first girl was killed, Perry, this guy, had killed and butchered 2 of his grandmother's dogs with a hatchet.
Dang.
And when the police got there, he admitted to it and then led them over to some buckets where he had all the remains of the dogs. In buckets. In buckets, man. And he was immediately arrested. This was on March 27th, which happened to be just a few days before the discovery of that first victim in that house on 6th Street.
That's right.
And at the time, Perry Killian had lived with his he had lived with his grandmother on 17th Street, which is just about 3 miles, just across the river.
Mm-hmm. Oklahoma River.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Perry would spend some time in a mental institution nearby, but would find himself back out on the streets a year later.
But it wouldn't last long.
No.
Another violent incident in 1978, when he attacked his grandmother with a knife, leading him, to be sent back to the hospital again. And then a year later, he broke out.
Yeah. And that was the same day that his sister Arlie would be killed and dismembered.
Right.
Yeah.
Exact same day.
Yeah. Same day.
So you think he's a suspect, hey?
I think he's a very strong suspect.
Yeah.
But this,
they picked him up pretty quick.
Mm-hmm. But Perry Killian was apprehended by authorities on April the 24th, 1979, just one day before police would identify his sister.
Right. So he was out 5 days before they caught him, and then the day after they picked him up, they did ID her that it was actually her.
Yeah. But, while it seemed likely that Perry was too good of a suspect to be ignored, investigators began to doubt his involvement. When additional pieces of the victim, his sister, continued to be recovered throughout the area.
They questioned him for hours, and stuff, trying to figure out stuff, but just didn't seem like he was the right guy.
Yeah.
And then as they had him locked up, like as you said, more pieces start showing up, so they know he can't do this from prison.
That's exactly right.
From the jail cell, rather.
Yeah. And when police tried to speak to this Perry Killian, they discovered that he was largely incoherent and seemed to be suffering from serious mental issues.
You think?
That would have made him an unlikely suspect.
Right.
But there was no evidence linking him to this crime, physical or circumstantial, and he would eventually be cleared of involvement. Now, over the next few years, the murder of Arlie Bell Killian would remain unsolved, with police quickly running out of leads and the public's interest turning elsewhere. But in 1983, another suspect of this crime would emerge, and this guy's name was Henry Lee Lucas.
Ooh,
yeah,
heard that name before.
Yes, he was a convicted killer from Texas who would become linked to several hundred crimes across the U.S.
Yeah, the confession killer.
Yeah, that's what he was known as, and he was. He said that he committed a series of murders and violent assaults between 1960s and 1980s. And he confessed to dozens of other crimes.
Yeah, I think he's just trying to prevent his execution from happening. So every time he'd get close, he'd start confessing to more stuff and trying to keep his butt out of the chair.
Yeah, he'd get to travel and do stuff too.
Right.
Yeah,
he was basically this dude, the short of it, he's just claiming everybody's stuff.
He's playing the system too. Yeah.
The serial killers are not stupid.
Mm-mm. And he was also conspired to commit crimes with another violent killer, and this guy's name was Otis Toole.
Yes. And
he was believed to have committed more crimes than originally admitted to.
Yeah.
And after being arrested in Texas in 1983, Henry Lee Lucas began confessing to crimes all over the country, like we talked about.
Mm-hmm. And among them was the murder of Arlie Killian.
Yeah, that's what he said.
Yeah. And the graphic details and stuff he shared with law enforcement was like, maybe it is.
But see, they were allowing him to look at the police records too and their case files.
Right, so he's smart. He was keeping all this stuff. He knew anything he told him, he could get coffee and cigarettes and get to go out like you said and stuff. And so he would just go in there and he was looking at stuff and he was like, yeah, I killed this one too, and I killed this one too. And then he would give them details, but heck, they were letting him read the details he was giving them.
Yeah.
And finally they caught on to that, I think, because they knew the only way he could have killed her, because he was supposedly somewhere else when this happened. So he couldn't be in two places at one time.
That's right.
So they kind of caught on a little bit, even though he had been through this area before. Mm-hmm. But it was a different time, I believe. Now,
Kyle Eastridge, a cold case inspector for Oklahoma City, spoke to the Daily Oklahoman in 2008 and revealed that Henry Lee Lucas, who died in 2001, was no longer viewed as a potential suspect.
Right.
He was quoted as saying, "We do have a record of him being in Oklahoma City during his travels, but I think this was someone who lived in the area, someone who knew the area pretty well. I mean, if you think about it, taking body parts and placing them around public, you'd almost have to be comfortable with the area you're in, because that's something that's certainly going to draw attention to if someone sees you."
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Hey, look at that guy. He's out throwing arms out in the yard.
Exactly. But despite investigators spending a year or so investigating Henry Lee Lucas as a potential killer of Arlie Killian, it would be confirmed just a few years later that he was undoubtedly not their guy when the crime spree continued while Henry Lee Lucas was behind bars. Now we're moving up to Thursday, March the 6th of 1986.
It was a big gap.
Yeah, big gap. And a 62-year-old man named Albert Archie was walking through his backyard on at 501 Northeast 1st Street. This was less than a mile from where the first two bodies in this story had been found, Dale. but in the same general area, but nearly 7 years after the last body had been found. So we're talking a big gap of time.
In 7 years.
Yeah.
But still right in almost the same place.
Yep. But in this alleyway behind his house, Archie would find a pretty gruesome discovery. Not only would he find the dismembered upper torso of a woman, but a piece of her lower leg and some other skin tissue, which, like the second victim, had been methodically hacked from her body and then cleansed and rinsed, just washed and just bloodless.
It's so weird, man.
And all the body parts were residing in a tall grass behind Archie's home.
It'd be fun to find your backyard, wouldn't it?
Yeah, just feet away from, just being dumped there by unknown people.
Yeah, crazy.
Police were called to the scene and began to suspect that after nearly 7 years, the
butcher was back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the crime scene seemed to share all the same calling cards of what happened back in 1979.
That seems to be the same.
Where Arlene Killian was disposed of.
Yeah, it's kind of the same as the one in 76, too.
Yeah. And this theory would seemingly be confirmed just a few days later, on March the 12th of 1986, when a second discovery was made just around the block of 507 North Lindsay Avenue. And this was the head of an unknown female victim was found inside a garbage bin, which had been intentionally set on fire, Dale.
Yeah, probably did that just to make sure it was discovered, you think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this discovery, just behind a garage in another alleyway, revealed that the killer was disposing of the victim's body parts kind of haphazardly.
Yeah.
But wanted to, like you said, draw attention.
Yeah, start a fire up. But it ended up burning basically, a pretty significant portion of the face off this one.
But thankfully, the police were able to identify the third victim of this killer due to 2 unique tattoos on her shoulders.
Right.
And the victim was 22-year-old Tina Marcia Saunders. And it had just been 1 day before her torso was found.
Yeah, she had just been seen at home.
Yeah. And this was March the 5th of 1986.
Crazy.
But she was believed to have been homeless and had ties to sex work.
So they all kind of fit that same mold there.
Yes. And within weeks of the discovery of this victim, police felt comfortable linking this crime to the first 2 that we were talking about, admitting publicly for the first time that one killer had been behind all 3 of these crimes, Dale. But now, while these 3 murders had taken place over an extended period of time, which was nearly an entire decade, investigators believed them to be linked. But not only did these 3 murders share some intense similarities.
Well, I mean, come on.
Yeah. But the victim profile seemed to be very similar.
Yeah, exactly. The profile was pretty same, and then the dismemberment, mutilation, the big smiles, and the washed flesh. It's all... I don't think that's copycatting.
But at this time, the identity of the first victim we talked about in that house was unknown for the time. And she seemed almost identical to the other 2, not only in terms of physical size, stature, and upbringing. And at this point, investigators knew all 3 were of Native American descent.
Right.
And that trait had been picked up from the first victim through blood tests and through identification of the second and third victims.
Right.
And it would later be confirmed that all 3 had grown up in poor families and communities. And it was also believed that all 3 of the victims had been homeless at the time of their murders. Arlie Killian and Tina Saunders, the 2 identified, at this point, they'd cut off contact with some family members, and this was just a short period of time before their death.
Yeah.
And,
homeless, I guess.
Yeah, and it would even be alleged that the 2 known victims had been engaged in sex work at the time of their deaths to make ends meet, and their bodies happened to be discovered, in this area, town.
Which was known for prostitutes.
Yeah. But because of these similarities, it was believed that all 3 victims had been intentionally targeted by this killer, who knew them to be homeless and sex workers, and of Native American ancestry. And it made them the perfect victims, Dale. Now, all 3 victims had been similarly disfigured and dismembered.
All 3.
Yeah. Likely after their deaths, although police never revealed the cause or manner of death of any. And, the bodies of the second and third victim, Arlie Killian and Tina Saunders, had been intentionally scattered throughout this area. At the time, this was a predominantly black neighborhood. and while the severed body parts of the first victim had been found inside this abandoned home. This seemed to be an exception to the case, as the set of remains had been discovered accidentally.
Right.
Now, this killer might have been considering disposing of her body parts in that way that Killian and Saunders' remains were distributed, but simply hadn't been given the chance to do so, or he just changed his MO at the time.
Yeah, either way, you don't know.
Yeah, you don't know. Now, Dale, the first and second victim seemed to share some distinctive cut through their lower lip.
Yeah, that's kind of odd, I thought.
Which originally connected their cases, which revealed later on that all the victims were missing body parts.
Yeah, especially the sex organs.
Yeah.
He took from all three bodies.
Yeah, that's crazy, man. Now, all these body parts, it seemed like the sex organs had been kept by this killer, like you said, potentially in some kind of trophy. Or been cut out of pure rage.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
Yeah, I think he just kept them for trophies.
Yeah.
Now, because each of the victims had been surgically dissected by the killer after their deaths, the investigators sort of thought that the killer might have been some kind of medical person, working in the medical field, perhaps a doctor or some kind of, maybe worked at the Oklahoma University Medical Center.
Right.
But it would later be proven that the process used to dismember the victims' bodies was just nothing like that, surgical or anything like that.
Yeah, it's just rather crude. It just probably had the proper equipment, so there's no, didn't need no surgical experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And shortly after linking together all three crimes in 1986, police would commission the FBI to help create some kind of psychological profile of this killer that would, sort of help their pursuit. And while specific details of this profile had not been released to the public, investigators would reveal that the killer was likely was a recluse with psychotic tendencies who may have some kind of history of mental illness.
You think?
I would think, yeah. Now, there was the guy we had talked about before. His name was John Douglas, and he was
Mindhunter, baby.
Yeah, he was the infamous criminal profiler.
Come up with the term serial killer.
He did.
Yeah.
And he surmised that the killer was likely a young loner with issues of self-identity who likely had a particular hatred of women. And this can be due to him catching some kind of disease from a woman or enduring a particular hostile upbringing with a female family member.
Yeah, it could be a lot of stuff, I think.
Yeah. But because of the violence perpetrated by against these three women and holding back the sex organs.
Yeah.
He said we can surmise that his hatred is likely sex related.
You're right.
Yeah.
So it might have had some stuff going on when he was young too. Hard to tell.
Very hard to tell. Now, investigators would speculate the killer might have been incarcerated at some point between these crimes because it was a big span, especially between the second and third murders.
I thought about that too. Either that or maybe he was somewhere else.
Yeah.
And he came back. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that was a large gap, yeah.
And they even thought it could have been explained by some military service or, like you said, just out of town or something.
Yeah, I don't know about military service. It's possible, I guess.
Yeah, but because of the serious brutality witnessed during this crime spree, it was believed that the killer was undoubtedly responsible for other crimes that, just hadn't been linked to him.
Right, could be.
Mm-hmm. Now, it wasn't until 1993 that the first known victim of this killer, whose remains had been found inside an abandoned house in 1976, was identified. And they were using some DNA. And police were able to confirm that the murdered woman was Kathy Lynn Shackelford.
Right.
And she was a member of the Sac and Fox Nation, whose family had been unsuccessfully looking for her for over 17 years.
Yeah. Sad.
How crazy is that?
Yeah.
Now, this identification came after many years because the cousin, her name was Andra Medina.
Yeah.
She had sort of held off on calling the police for years at the urging of her mother.
Well, her mother told her basically it's not your place to call on behalf of another family. So basically, I figured these folks were on a reservation or something.
Yeah.
Because they're like, they never called to report her missing.
No.
Her family. So this girl was wanting to, but her mother, I guess being real traditional, was like, it's not your place to do it.
Stay out of it.
Right.
But after both of Kathy's parents had died and Andra's mother had died, she realized that
now it's on her.
Yeah, something's got to be done.
Yeah. Well, everybody else is gone, so now it is her. It's her place now if she's only living relative.
Okay, I get that. I didn't think about that, but yeah, I get that now.
Yeah, so now, it's good either way.
Okay. Now, after not hearing from Kathy for a long time, Andra had decided to call the police there in Oklahoma City. And she got in touch with Sergeant Norma Adams.
Correct.
Who had remembered seeing the facial reconstruction of the victim in 1976, the one that was found in the house.
Yeah, she had it on her desk for several months back in the 70s, so she remembered, when she called.
And after learning that Kathy had gone missing just a short time before the discovery of this victim's body, and just like her, had rather short fingers, Sergeant Adams began to put two and two together, man.
Mm-hmm, figured it out.
Yeah. And soon a tooth of the victim would be sent to a lab in Berkeley, California, where they extracted DNA and compared it to a sample from Kathy's older sister, who would confirm that the victim's identity as Kathy Lynn Shackelford.
Mm-hmm.
And her family was pretty heartbroken to learn that
she'd been dead this whole time.
Yeah. Having received reports of potential sightings all over the country.
Yeah, that's bad.
But at least they knew what happened to her, man. Yeah. Now, like the other two victims, Kathy Lynn Shackelford was a runaway who had left her family's home in June of 1975 at the age of 17. And she would turn 18 about a month later, but refused to move back home.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, living in the area of Oklahoma City, where she would just live off the grid.
And be homeless.
Yeah. Her last known sighting came 2 months before her approximate time of death. And she had been treated at the Oklahoma City University Hospital, but the time leading up to her death remained a total mystery.
Yeah, nobody knows.
Now, this Andra Medina, the one that reported her missing, this Kathy's cousin, would later remark that Kathy was always just a smiling person.
Yeah, which is kind of ironic, isn't it?
It is very ironic. Ironic to the mutilation of her face, man.
Right, with the giant smile.
Yeah, it's terrible. Which makes some people think that the killer knew who she was, which I don't know about that.
I don't think so either.
I think that was just his MO, man.
That's what he did, yeah.
Yeah. Now, in 2008, Andra would speak to reporters from the Daily Oklahoman and remembered about her murdered cousin. And she was quoted as saying, "He cut off her breast, he cut her mouth open, he scalped her. He cut her female organs up and opened her up. And he cut her hands off, her arms off, her legs, everything." That's hard to hear and imagine, but we just try to think that she's in a better place now. We wonder about who this was, who could have done this to her. Is this person alive?
Yeah.
Is this someone who's dead, already gone? We just want to know. That's what she was quoted as saying. Yeah, I can't imagine, man.
Right. Crazy.
Now, in 2007, a 52-year-old named Roderick Webster was arrested in Oklahoma City and alleged to have had committed one of the most gruesome crimes in the state's history.
Yeah.
This was on March the 22nd of 1989. 75-year-old Audrey Harris was murdered inside her apartment in downtown Oklahoma City.
Yeah, this is pretty rough.
Yeah, which she shared with her common-law husband. He was 49-year-old Lloyd Ballantyne.
So he was 49 and she's 75?
That's what it says, yeah.
Okay.
Now, the crime was particularly brutal because the killer had cut open Harris with a knife and then began to disembowel her with his bare hands, pulling out several of her organs as well as her sex organs, and then throwing them against the wall.
Crazy.
But because the injuries weren't immediately fatal, Audrey would suffer a prolonged painful
So she
death.
was alive while he's doing it?
Yes.
Oh.
And, it makes me think that these other girls might have been alive too.
Well, sorry, Audrey. That was rough.
That was rough. Now, after the murder was reported, police began to suspect the victim's long-term love interest, Lloyd Ballantyne.
Yeah, because he was there.
Yeah, who had been at the crime scene, like I said, when the victim was attacked. So Ballantyne would later claim been knocked unconscious by the real killer. That's what he was saying.
Yeah.
And for more than a year, Ballantyne would be investigated as the main suspect. He spent a year in jail as a result, but being cleared of any suspicion.
Yeah. That's bad. That's bad being blamed for it, and also bad having to sit a year in jail if you didn't do anything.
While you're being looked at.
Yeah. And then go, oh, sorry, you didn't do it. See ya.
Mm-hmm. Now, despite the killer leaving behind a large amount of evidence, including a bloody palm print, DNA evidence, and footprints from a very definitive type of shoe, police would be unable to track him down for quite some time.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until years later, when multiple pieces of evidence were retested, that investigators began to narrow in on Roderick Webster.
Yeah, it was a long time, from 89 to 2007.
Yeah. Now, Webster, who had been working as a nurse's aide in Oklahoma City at the time, was connected to the victim in at least one minor way. His stepfather happened to live right next door to Audrey Harris.
Yeah, that lady.
And Lloyd Valentine, giving him at least some kind of familiarity with the area and maybe even the victim. And while Webster had managed to avoid suspicion for several years, he did have a minor rap sheet which involved some crimes such as DUI and suspended license and some misdemeanor things.
Yeah, not much.
Yeah, assault and battery. Now, it was roughly 2 years after his arrest, this was in 2009, Roderick Webster would be found guilty of first-degree murder, with the jury choosing him to serve out a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. And his fate was sealed when the jury was allowed to listen to the audio from the original police interrogation in 2007, in which he physically collapsed after being told that DNA linked him to the murder of Audrey Harris in 1989.
Yeah, we got you.
Yeah, we got you, man. And afterward, he apologized for killing the woman, yet would deny any involvement throughout his trial with the physical evidence. It was presented as absolute certainty, man.
So he's sorry for doing it, but he didn't do it.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
We got all this on you, but yeah. Now, while Roderick Webster wasn't linked to any other crimes from that time, he remains a possible candidate in this case. Not only was he African-American killer that lived in the area where these bodies were found, but the brutality of his own
he's
showing
murder. He don't mind butchering somebody. That was pretty damn rough.
Yeah, well, he done Audrey.
Yeah, that's up there.
Yep. Despite Roderick Webster being, a suitable candidate for this murder spree, there were some details that worked against him.
Well, it was different. It was a different MO than everything.
This was a breaking and entering.
Exactly, breaking and entering. It was an elderly white lady, not a young sex worker or a young homeless lady.
Native American.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So everything's different. I mean, it was very, very brutal, but I don't like this guy for this.
Yeah, but while Roderick Webster is a suspect in this case, there's not anything,
nothing new, and he ain't been charged.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't like him for these murders.
Yeah.
Even though he was in the area.
These three that we talked about remains unsolved to this day, and they've grown cold over the years.
Yep.
Sad. Between 1979 and 1992, the same time that this murder spree unfolded, the third leading cause of death of Native American women was homicide. But the three victims in this case, Dale, have been since buried and laid to rest, and their killer remains unknown.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of this stuff with Native American women, it just kind of seemed like they didn't really push the issue a lot, because even the first lady that was killed in 76, there was a lot of press and stuff going on until they did the blood work that showed that she was of American Indian heritage. And then it was basically like, never mind.
Yeah.
So that's kind of shitty if you ask me. I mean, because, they were all into it, what's going on, and then you find out it was this, just like it's like they didn't even care anymore.
I know. All right, Dale, at the beginning of this episode, we mentioned Carina Saunders.
Yes.
Yeah. And while we were researching Carina, we came across a YouTuber.
Yes.
Her name is Becky Long.
Becky Long.
And she only has a couple of videos on her channel.
2.
Yes. And the first video, she is talking about her father.
Yes.
His name is Deral Long.
Yeah, and it's entitled "My Dad Was a Serial Killer," called the OKC Butcher, and I believe he killed Carina Saunders.
And we're going to put the link to her YouTube channel in our show notes, and we're going to put it on our social medias too.
Right.
Because we think this is very important.
And this video has been up 11 months, and then 3 months ago, our second video come up, which is updated. It was released in February, and it's like, "My dad, the serial killer, I need your help."
Yes.
So,
and she has a lot of good information claiming that her dad was the Oklahoma City Butcher.
Right. So even though he's been unnamed, all this stuff, she believes that her dad, Deral, Deral Long, was the killer.
Yes, that's what she's claiming. And she also claims, Dale, that her dad was the killer of Carina Saunders.
Yes.
That's what she is claiming. And she has some pretty impelling
And if you think about
information.
What she says, yeah, because, you know, if you think about these crimes with all this dismemberment and torture and kind of stuff going on, it kind of fits the bill a little bit.
He was very brutal to her family.
Yes.
I mean, he was a piece of shit, just put it plainly.
Right.
And we have reached out to her, and we're trying to get a hold of her to interview her. Yeah. I want to talk to her bad.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll give you, right here it says on our page, a quick recap if you haven't watched my video. My dad was a serial killer, the OKC butcher. Next, then is the little target points. He murdered and brutally dismembered at least 3 women, Harley Killian, Kathy Shackelford, and Marcia Sanders. And then she says, I believe he murdered Carina Saunders as well. He lived 1.5 miles from where she was found, and she was murdered in the same way as these other victims, like I said. Mm-hmm. And then she says, I was sexually exploited by my dad and his friend, who were both involved in sex trafficking and the sexual exploitation of children. That friend owned a business near Bethany, near the Bethany city limits, and that business was a cover for illegal activity, including sex trafficking and the sexual exploitation of children. And she's reached out to law enforcement, and they have not acted, nor are they listening. The OK Police Department has shown zero interest in solving 3 of the most horrific murders where these indigenous women were all targeted.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it is very possible that he may have thought that Carina maybe was Native American, you know?
Yeah. Well, he's well older by then, by the time she was killed.
Mm-hmm. This is true. But we wanted to do this episode, and we wanted to follow up on Carina because this is some stuff we had found in our research.
And we felt it was connected. So
it's very connected.
Right. And especially if we can get her.
Yeah. If we can get a hold of her, we will do another follow-up episode with her.
Yeah, her being Becky Long.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you know her, give her a holler. We've reached out several different ways, and we're awaiting her reply.
Yeah, so Becky, if you hear this, email us. We've emailed you.
Yes.
And we're going to, like I said, we're going to put a link to her YouTube channel on our socials and let everybody watch that and the information she has on her dad being the Oklahoma City butcher.
Yes.
But that's what we got, Dale. And this murder of these 3 women is still unsolved today.
Still unsolved.
Yeah. But we wanted to do it and try to help get the word out.
Yeah. You know, speaking of, Becky's dad has now passed away. So that's if anybody's wondering, well, why didn't they just turn him in? Yeah.
So he's definitely off the streets now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
All right, man. Let's get out of here.
All right. We're going to roll.
Let's roll.
We want everyone to be safe. Please be careful and always be aware of your surroundings.
Because the next episode could be about you.
This is the Crack House Chronicles.